Hey everybody, David here with Cascade Components. Today we're going to be installing the Cascade Components link on the Transition Scout. To install the link on your Scout, you'll need the link itself, a little bit of grease, a rag, an 8mm Allen wrench, and a 5mm Allen wrench. The first step in installing your link is to get the wheel out of the way, so we'll go ahead and remove that and set it to the side. Now that the wheel is out of the way, we're going to go through and loosen all of the suspension pivot bolts. So we'll loosen the bolt at the shock, the main pivot, and then the two seat stay pivots. Now that we have all the bolts loose, we're going to go ahead and remove the two seat stay pivots. All right, when you're about to remove the second seat stay pivot, you want to try and use your hand to hold everything together so it doesn't all come apart too fast. So remove your bolt and set it aside. Slowly lower down the seat stays. There will be a few spacers in here that will fall out, so you're going to try to catch those as you lower everything. There will be 4 spacers here, and we'll set these aside. Now that your seat stay pivots are out of the way, we'll go ahead and remove this piece of hardware here. Set that aside, and finally we'll loosen the shock bolt. When you remove this, just make sure you've got a hold of everything and lower your shock down carefully, and then you can push out the main pivot. Finally, you'll be able to remove the link itself. There's a couple spacers in here so you can hold your hand underneath and catch them as you pull the link off. Okay, now that we have all the hardware off of our bike, we'll take this opportunity to get it all cleaned up. Now that we have all of our hardware cleaned up, we will apply a little bit of grease to all 6 bearing spacers, the 2 main pivot spacers, and the 4 spacers for the seat stays. You can also grab a little bit of grease and put it on your pivot hardware. You don't need a lot, just a thin film. So now to install the link on the bike, we'll take our spacers with the grease on it. We use that grease to stick the main pivot spacers in place, like so. And then we can feed the link through the frame. You might have to use your fingers to make sure the bearing spacers stay in place. Get everything lined up. Now that we have the main pivot through, we'll get our shock lined up and the shock bolt installed. Now that these 2 are installed, we can lightly tighten the rest of our hardware here. Alright, so now we'll grab our 4 seat stay bearing spacers. These are all the same, so it doesn't matter which spot they go, but it will be 1 on each side of these seat stay bearings. Now that we have all 4 bearing spacers in place, we will get the seat stays moved up and into position over the bearings. This part might be helpful to have another set of hands. Sometimes the bearing spacers want to get knocked out, and not every frame is perfectly straight, so you might have to finagle your frame to get it to line up right. You can use your hand to hold it in place as you get your hardware installed. Once everything's in place, you can use your finger to kind of get everything lined up and get these bolts started. Again, we'll lightly snug these down. Now that you have all your bolts installed and snugged up, you'll want to come through with a torque wrench and torque them to factory spec. For demonstration purposes, we're not going to do that today, but obviously when you install the link, you'll want to make sure you do that. So now we'll get the wheel reinstalled. Cool. Now that you have the wheel back on your bike and it's back down on the ground, the next step is to check for adequate clearance between all moving parts. To do that, let the air out of your shock, compress the suspension all the way, and look for clearance between the back of the seat tube and the chainstay bridge, as well as you want to check for clearance behind your shock and between your shock reservoir and the top of the down tube. If you have adequate clearance there, then the next step is to air your shock back up. Check your sag. You want to shoot for about 30% sag. Once your sag is set, go ride your bike and make any adjustments to air pressure or compression and rebound as needed. Thanks for watching. For any more info on this link or any of the other links we make, check us out at cascadecomponents.bike.